Welcome back to the Totem Confidence Podcast, Season 3, Episode 2. I am so excited to speak with our guest today, one of the greatest teachers of the Enneagram in the world today, and the author of one of my favorite Enneagram books, The Complete Enneagram. Dr. Beatrice Chestnut, PhD, is a licensed psychotherapist, coach, and business consultant in San Francisco, specializing in integrating the Enneagram and supporting personal and professional development. She offers trainings and retreats based on the Enneagram internationally. Dr. Chestnut is the author of now 3 books: The Complete Enneagram, 27 Paths to Greater Self-Awareness, The 9 Types of Leadership, Mastering the Art of People in the 21st Century Workplace, and The Enneagram Guide to Waking Up. Find your path, face your shadow, discover your true self. Co-authored by her partner, Uranio Paez. Welcome to Total Confidence, Dr. Chestnut.
It's a big honor to be here. Really happy to talk with you.
Feelings mutual. It was so nice to see you in the International Enneagram Global Conference in San Francisco.
It's always good to see people in person these days.
Exactly. That was my first one. I was really on 10 and got to see, people I've been looking at online, but I've met you a few years back in Norfolk, Virginia, which I'll get into a little later. But I'm so excited to speak with you. I read that you're originally from Palo Alto, California.
Yes. Yeah.
What was life like growing up there?
Oh, interesting question. Well, now, of course, Palo Alto is known as really the heart of Silicon Valley. And, when I was growing up there as a kid, it didn't feel special, but I do think that I was really lucky, and it's sort of a unusual place to grow up. I found out later. It's right next to Stanford University. It's of course gotten wealthier over the years, but it was a great place to grow up. It was safe. I had a lot of kids my age living on my street. It was a suburban environment, really good school. So I was very lucky to grow up there and had lifelong friends that I met from like age 3 and 10 and still that go there. My parents still live there, so I visit. I have good friends there. It was nice to grow up there.
Awesome. How were you first introduced to the Enneagram, and what was your first impression of it?
Great question. So I was first introduced to it. So Dr. David Daniels, who is a psychiatrist, who many people may know of because he was, one of the early pioneering teachers in the Enneagram world. He, by a twist of fate, his youngest son, he has 3 children. He had 3 children. His younger son, David Daniels, was one of my best friends from junior high on. We met in 7th grade, and we were really close, and we only got closer over the years. And he was just an amazing person. And he died suddenly and tragically when we were 25 years old, in a subway accident in New York City. Nobody knows what really happened. But he was one of these people, like if I told you about him, you'd think I was exaggerating, idealizing him. But he was an amazing person, smart, witty, funny, warm, loving. Went to Stanford, was a walk-on on the soccer team, just a great guy. He was an investment banker at the time. And when that happened, of course, it was a huge shock to all of us who loved him, and of course to his parents and his family. And at that moment, I had seen Helen Palmer's Enneagram book on David's shelf in New York in his apartment. And I was sort of like, what's this? And he said, oh, it's something my dad is working with her, and he's really into it, and that's the first thing I knew. But after David died, his parents were comforted by having David's friends around them. So we were invited over multiple occasions. They invited us to help plan the memorial. And of course, it was a really painful time, but also a time of kind of coming together with his family, where I got closer to them because I had been close to their son. And So, one night over the dinner table, Dr. Daniels just started talking about the Enneagram, and here he is, a Stanford-based psychiatrist, and the way I'll never forget the way he introduced it to me. He said, "This is my calling," which touches me because that was unusual for someone who was steeped in science and psychiatry, which isn't necessarily the most open-minded of professions. Here he was working with Helen Palmer, an intuitive, a teacher of intuition, to bringing this to the world. And he said it's by far the most effective healing tool that I've ever encountered. And he'd been he was a psychiatrist who was also a psychotherapist, right? So he was real, and he was a good one. Not all psychiatrists make good therapists, but he, I think, was an exception to the rule. He was fantastic. And so he told me about the Enneagram. He loaned me the book. I went home and read it, and I read my type, of course, first, like we always do. And I was completely blown away by it. I was shocked. I was, a few years out of undergrad, out of college, and in college, I never studied psychology. I took one psychology course, and it was the only course I got a C in. And I really didn't like it because, to me, it was putting kind of jargony language to things that were really obvious. It wasn't really, I didn't really, like, I was interested in people, but it wasn't really telling me very much. To me, it seemed like it was, anyway. So I hadn't really studied psychology, but I was fascinated by this. And I think I had sort of a skeptical view of personality typologies generally. Like, they just couldn't really tell you that much, like, how much are they really going to tell you? Like, just things that you already know, conscious, stuff that you were already conscious about. So I wasn't, I hadn't been interested in anything like that. But when I read my personality type description, it just fit so well. I couldn't believe it. It was like, I couldn't believe that it was telling me all these things I knew about myself in such a clear way, like a clearer way than I could have defined them myself. And it was also telling me about things that I didn't want to know about myself, but that I had to admit once upon reflection. Like, I'll never forget, in Helen's book, it said that 2s could be manipulative, and I'm a type 2. And I read that, and of course, everything all my defenses went up. It said, "I'm not manipulative, I'm nice," But when I really thought about it, okay, what is manipulation? If I try to take the defensiveness, the negative out of it, well, it's moving things around behind the scenes so you don't have to ask for what you want directly. Oh my gosh, I do that all the time, So I started to see how some of the negative stuff actually fit too, and it was hard to see that, but it was also kind of a relief. Like, wow, there's something that exists that is this accurate and this deep that can help me learn about myself and other people. Like, and so I was immediately really consumed by it. I actually changed the course of my career in the next year and a half because of the Enneagram. I started an inner work path more consciously. I had just come out of graduate school, my PhD in communication. And I was kind of depressed at the time, actually. I was working as a waitress. I was depressed, and I was trying to finish my dissertation, which wasn't going well. And I got into therapy for the first time. I got my first astrology natal reading. I joined a women's group. So I started doing these things. And in the course of that, the Enneagram was like front and center. I was talking about it with my friends. I was using it in my therapy. And through that process, came to know myself, I think, for the first time, because what I learned is, 2s, because we other reference so much, our attention is so focused on the outside world, on other people, always asking the question, do you like me? Do you approve of me? That it's like I couldn't be inside myself. My intention wasn't inside myself. And so I didn't really know myself, but I didn't know that I didn't know myself. But I learned all kinds of things. And part of that, and that depression, I would have to say, ended up turning more into grief, and sort of a grief for having lost myself, most of all. And so I realized things like I had always thought I was a happy person. And I think generally I was, and have been. But I realized that a lot of the time I was acting happy for other people. either so they would like me or they would want to be around me or so they would feel better, and if they felt better, I would feel better. So that's a really long question that sort of went beyond your question, but I'll stop there.
Oh no, I appreciate it. Like I love the comprehensive answer. So was there a particular moment when you said, I have to teach this, you know?
That's a good question. Really good question. So I don't think I would say not in the early years at all. What happened was, so I learned the Enneagram in 1990 when David's son died in March of 1990. And then I moved to Chicago. When I moved to Chicago to go to graduate school, actually, as fate would have it, I had a cousin there who I really liked, who was really into the Enneagram, but not only the Enneagram, but all the stuff behind it. Like he knew about Gurdjieff, and he handed me Ouspensky's book, In Search of the Miraculous. So I would add to what I said before, another thing that the Enneagram did and kind of blowing my mind and helping me understand myself is it brought me back to spirituality. I had sort of given up on religion because the Catholicism I was raised with didn't really seem very spiritual or very helpful. But when I learned the Enneagram and I learned all of what it was connected to in terms of esoteric knowledge and spirituality and ancient wisdom teachings, that excited me even more. So it was in the early years. So then in 1996, I actually went through the narrative tradition training. So the Dr. Daniels and Helen Palmer school. I went in that training to become a teacher in 96 and 97. But even then, I mean, I was pretty young. I was in my 20s, and I as a self-preservation too, we tend to make ourselves smaller and feel sort of young and like I'm not sort of, there's an insecurity around, like, I don't see myself as being big and powerful, to my detriment. And so and even though I went through the professional training program, it wasn't really to be a teacher at that time. It was more to study the Enneagram more in depth. And there was this amazing opportunity, this school that was happening, minutes from where I lived. It was in Menlo Park, which is just north of Palo Alto, of course, because David Daniels lived there and I lived near him. So I went through that and loved it, and loved all the people I met there, loved every second of it. And then I think the next thing was, I think what I thought, it wasn't like I want to teach this, it was I want to work with this. Right. So part of what came out of my therapy at that time that I got into is, okay, I'm going to finish my dissertation, but I don't necessarily want to work in academics where that dissertation and that my graduate degree was taking me. I'm like, okay, I need to shift gears. I need to shift to a different career. So the first thought was, I really want this to be part of my work life. I really want to do something in my life that's centered on this. So the first step was to become a psychotherapist. So I thought, and again, this was an evolution because I had not been interested in psychology. But when I learned the Enneagram and I learned what the Enneagram was, now I could be interested in psychology, because it wasn't psychology as science. It was more psychotherapy as art. So I think of it more, I think of myself less as a scientist and more as an artist. And so when it comes to therapy and therapeutic work, so that was the next step, was to go back to school again. And I'll never forget when I was interviewing at the school I went to study psychology here in San Francisco. I remember them doing the group interview and the guy looking at me going, "Are you sure you want to do this?" Because I'd just been in school for years and years. So I did go back to school to become a psychotherapist, but that was something that was more practical. And again, the whole goal was, I just want to use the Enneagram as a professional, and I want to have an impact on people that's more direct than I would have if I was in academics. And I want the impact to be about this. And of course, as a two, I had learned about myself. I need to go with my natural strengths, which is I'm totally interested in people, what makes them tick, individual people, groups of people. I'm just fascinated by people. And the Enneagram was fascinating also. So it was like, this is what I want to work with. So the first step was, I want to work with this. And in the first, I would say, stage, it was more about psychotherapy. After that, kind of group facilitation training and business consulting came. And so I would say it wasn't until later that then I thought I want to teach this, although it was nice because I had gone through the narrative tradition, which is sort of a teacher preparation.
Beautiful, beautiful. What inspired you to write this masterpiece, the complete Enneagram, which I'm holding right now? Yeah, how did that come about, and how was it initially received?
You were very generous. I appreciate that a lot. Well, it's interesting. It was a lot of work to even think of myself as someone that could write a book like this. I didn't, again, as a self-pres too, I'm sort of erring more on the side of, it's not really humility. It's more making myself small, which is sort of the other side of pride, of like wanting to be big, but then being afraid of that. And so saying, oh no, I can't be big. But I'll tell you, in my therapy, I was in years of therapy, of course, and my therapist helped me a lot to kind of get to the place where I could write it. And I would say the motivating factors were two or three. One of them was in 2004, I learned at an IEA conference, we invited Claudio Naranjo, who I believe is like the most important person who defined the 9 types and the 27 subtypes in the 20th century. Oscar Ichazo was very important. He brought the Enneagram forward, but Claudio Naranjo really refined the descriptions in a way that I don't think enough people give him credit for, to sort of make more sense and fit more with people's experience and in a more coherent way. If you look at the 9 types in the way Ichazo and the Eureka School define them, they're different than the way Claudio Naranjo's 9 types ended up looking. And I think it was a combination of the fact that he was working a lot in spirituality and meditation and Gestalt and working with a lot of people, seeing a lot of things, and also his intuition. But anyway, in 2004, Claudio Naranjo came with about 15 or 16 of his really amazing therapists and assistants. And they taught all of us at the IEA conference in Washington, D.C., in Alexandria, Virginia, the subtypes as he had been teaching them. So the 27 subtypes, the 3 versions of each of the 9 types, based on which of one of the 3 instincts in us, instinctual drives, is strongest. And that was another revolution in my understanding of myself and of the Enneagram, because although there had been subtype teachings out there, and certainly we learned subtypes when I was trained in the narrative tradition school, it wasn't anything near what Claudio taught at that 2004 conference. He had added so much nuance and so much depth and so much detail that wasn't there before, that for me made it make sense as a system in itself, and also helped me make sense of myself, because I had not known I was a self-preservation 3. I didn't really know what subtype I was, because to me it was sort of hard to figure it out based on the limited information that was out there about the subtypes. But what he added was huge. And then his assistants helped me see I was a self-preservation 2 and what that meant. And so what that meant is I was exposed to a whole bunch of new blind spots that I had not seen before, even though I had been studying the Enneagram at that point for 14 years. So it was amazing to learn so much more about myself 14 years in, with this added dimension of the teaching and this added dimension of the subtypes. So what happened though was, after that conference, in my mind, I thought, oh, now the whole Enneagram world has changed, right? Because the seminal teacher of the Enneagram types, Claudio Naranjo, has come and given this infusion of knowledge to this important meeting of Enneagram enthusiasts, international meeting. Well, guess what? Nothing changed in the Enneagram community after that. Everyone went back to teaching the subtypes the way they always did, as if it didn't happen. And I think there are a lot of reasons for that. He was, he's not someone who tries to please people and get their approval. You as a social 5 may know that's not your main priority, and he's a social 5 too. But what happened is I got kind of frustrated that this amazing information that had changed my life wasn't available to all the other people. And that I now saw the 9 types alone as kind of a blunt instrument, as sort of something that it wasn't really going to work well without that addition of the 27 more detailed, nuanced character types. And there's some of the 27 that you never hear about, that don't exist if you don't know this version of the 27 types, right? Because the way he really was able to discern these 3 different categories within each type was amazing. No one else had done that. And so the one reason I wanted to write the book was to get that version of the subtypes out there, because Claudio hadn't written anything about himself. And it didn't seem to be on his program. I had heard there was maybe something being written in Spanish, but I just felt like, and I started talking about it with people and teaching it a little bit. And that was probably, I think, one of the first impulses to teach for me was I gotta help people understand the subtype thing. And because it would get frustrating to hear people talk about the 9 types without that, and see how much mistyping there was, and how much people didn't know that there was a counter type for each type, just the 6. So all these things, that was one big reason I wanted to write the book. The second reason was I felt like I had some things to say, because by that point, by sort of in the mid 2000s, like late 2000s, like the first 10 years of the 2000s, like maybe 2010, I'd been a therapist working with the Enneagram for about 12 years. And I felt like I was learning a lot about, like, especially what psychotherapists might need to know. And so I wanted to build a bridge to psychotherapy, but I also wanted to make a more psychotherapeutic approach to working with type more available to more people. So I wanted to kind of say it in accessible language. I wanted to invite more people into the Enneagram, but also respect them enough to know that a lot of them wanted something deep. Now, in the beginning, my idea was to make it good for both introductory people, or like lay people and psychotherapists. I think I had to let go of the audience that might be sort of really new and maybe not as sophisticated, but like sophisticated lay people, is sort of the way I was thinking about it. And so I wanted to kind of put everything in there that I thought was really important for people to know if they wanted to use the Enneagram in a serious, deeper way, including the subtypes.
Yeah, my 3 oldest children are counter types. So the book helped me. My oldest son is a self-preservation 3. My oldest daughter is a self-preservation 4. And my second oldest son is a counter type 6, or a counterphobic 6, or sexual 6.
Yeah.
And so the book helped me with them and understanding, like, oh, he's a self-preservation 3. That's why I couldn't figure out what it was. But once okay. So it's very, very insightful. And with me being a social 5, when I read about the spiritual bypass, it hurt, but I needed it, because it's like I do that all the time. So I've personally have benefited from it, So I really appreciate you having that foresight to say, okay, this just can't float out there. So how was it received once you started teaching it? So I know it was some resistance in the beginning. Did that change over the years?
I would say there was a lot of acceptance by just people that I would meet at workshops and trainings. Once they saw it, once we saw a panel, I used film clips in the beginning, because I felt like I couldn't, I was trained in the panel method, and I love that method. Like, having the types speak for themselves is so much better than hearing a lecture about the types. But I couldn't really use that method in the beginning with the subtypes, because a lot of people had their subtype wrong because of the sort of the limited teaching that was out there. So I used film clips, and I would talk about them, and people by the end of like 2 or 3 days would be like totally into it. And and really getting it. And a lot of people would find their types for the first time. I had, there was a guy in Denmark who had been a 3 for 10 years and was, crying on the panel saying, I finally found where I can really land in the Enneagram after 10 years. So there was a lot of acceptance by people I would meet at workshops and Enneagram enthusiasts. I would say not as much acceptance among sort of teachers, higher level people who had their own approach, I think, and own teaching. because I think I was trying to bring in something new. And I think sometimes that, in a system, they resist change or resist being open to something new, because now if I accept this new teaching, do I have to say I was wrong before? And I think a lot of people don't want to do that. So it didn't feel like it was like totally widely accepted right away, but I think over time, one of the things that's incredibly gratifying is I'll go to a conference or something and I'll meet someone will come up to me that I don't know at all and say, I love your book. It was how I finally understood the Enneagram. And that to me is so gratifying, because I think it speaks to some people out there, and you probably at the top of the list, who are really wanting and open to a deeper description that's straightforward, but that includes, more nuance and more detail and more depth, of description, but also of, sort of heading toward the growth path as well.
I was reading your bio, and wow, I gave not even a a nugget of the things that you have in your bio. You served on the IEA board for 6 years, and you were the president of the International Enneagram Association, that's IEA, for 2006 and 2007. What were some of the greatest takeaways having those experiences?
It was an honor to serve on that board. It was, one of the things that I took away from my earliest Enneagram training was, I remember my experience at the narrative Enneagram trainings was I liked mealtime the most, right? I like food, but also anyone I was sitting next to at the dinner table, I had an amazing conversation with, So I think it was just really great to be in a world where I was talking to people about the Enneagram all the time, where I was, helping to create community that was working for people, that people could come together in. I think I was relatively young, and I think they brought me in, and also Oranio Pius, who's now my business partner and co-teacher. They brought us in at the same time. That's how we met, as sort of the young people on the board. That was a long time ago, of course. And so it was a good thing to try to bring sort of new ideas, to try to make the association work better and attract more people. I think being young and not experienced in different ways, I wish sometimes I wish I could go back and do things a little bit differently here or there, only just as a leader. I think it was one of my earliest experiences of being a leader, and as a self-preservation too, it's hard to feel like to step into my power. And so I always felt like I was really having to push myself out there. But it was great to be sort of at the center of learning about different Enneagram approaches and new information and new voices coming into the community. And it fit in with, I think, my mission, which is to bring the Enneagram to the larger world in whatever ways we can, and to keep things going and expanding and trying to do better and better at what we do, which I think we had some successes on, but I think it's still a work in progress. And the current board is doing an amazing job continuing that in many new ways that we hadn't really gotten to yet.
You mentioned Oranio Paez, your partner, co-founder of the CP Enneagram Academy. How did you two know, I'm asking you, how did you know he was the right person? I'm sure he's not the first person that wanted to partner with you, but y'all complement each other so well. I really enjoyed the conference in Norfolk, and I just saw how y'all, feed off of each other. But how did y'all know it was right to work together and go eventually forming the CP Enneagram Academy?
Yeah, well, so of course we were on the board for the same 6 years together, from about 2004 to end of 2009. And so we became friends there. We were usually on the same side of different issues and discussions. We worked a lot as a team, trying to bring certain people in, or getting people talking to each other, or new initiatives that they're still doing today, like the accreditation program and the affiliation with international, with country region organizations. That was Uranio's work. But at the time, I would say I never had the slightest thought of working with him then. And when we went off the board, as boards can be sort of frustrating, I think we were both really done. And we actually had a couple of years where we weren't in touch very much. Of course, lived in Brazil. I was in the US. So didn't really talk that much for a few years, and from like 2010 to 2013. And then right before the 2013 conference, when the Complete Enneagram book came out, I was about to go to the Denver conference. It was in Denver that year. And Uranio's birthday is usually right around the IEA conference in July. And his birthday came up on Facebook. And I was still a little pissed at him. And so I thought, I'm not going to wish him happy birthday. And then I heard myself say that to myself. And I thought, luckily I had developed some capacity for self-observation. And I just thought, wow, how much pride and pettiness do you have on right now? That is not cool. And so I thought, oh, come on. So I sent him a happy birthday message, a sincere one, right? And right away he wrote back to me and he said, hey, do you want to have lunch at the conference? And so I said yes. And so luckily we had lunch the first day and we started talking again the next day. So that was Friday. The next day I went to his session. And he was doing a session that was titled something like Energy Work and the Enneagram, right? And I had always known him as a business consultant. So, he has a degree, a master's degree in business. He had always been, working with the Enneagram and coaching and consulting in businesses. So that's what I thought. He was the business guy, right? And I knew he had studied in Gurdjieff groups and things like that, but I didn't really know much about him because he's a 5 and he didn't share that much about that stuff at the time. And so I went to see his session and I was completely blown away by what he was doing and what I saw. And I just really saw that not only was he doing something I had never seen before, he was doing his Enneagram work, energy work on the Enneagram mat on the floor in the context of this group, but he was doing it really well. Right. And here I am, a psychotherapist, and I'm going to be skeptical of somebody who's doing this energy work, especially someone who's a business guy. Right. So I'm looking at him going like, are you competent to do this? Like, should you be doing this? And every decision I saw him making, every move he was making was like, he totally knows what he's doing. And I had a huge emotional reaction during that, like during what he was doing, working with people on the mat. I would cry and cry and cry. I was having all these incredibly strong, really deep emotional responses to what was happening. And I just thought, this is amazing. And I went up to him at the party that night and I said, because I didn't see him right after, I said, you didn't tell me you were doing that kind of work. That is amazing. And he was relieved because he wasn't sure how what he was doing would be received by some of the sort of leading citizens in the community. Yeah. And I thought it was fantastic and amazing. And again, I wouldn't have known, I would have trusted him so much to do that, but I just implicitly did because it was so obvious that he was so skilled in what he was doing. And so from that moment, we got in touch more. We sort of went we went to conferences kind of more together and would do things together. And I went to visit him in London where he had moved in 2015. And I went to some training, he did some workshops on that using that method, and I would go to them. And so we started spending more time together. And again, even then I was thinking, okay, what he's doing is really different than what I do. I'm more of a teacher. I'm a psychotherapist. I work with people, but more in a psychotherapeutic mode, and what he was doing felt really spiritual, very deep, although it definitely had a psychological element. And I was always watching him and he dealt with the psychological super well. He really knew what he was talking about. So one day I remember we were driving through London, like in an Uber or a taxi or something. And he just said, we should teach together. And it really surprised me because, again, as a self-pres too, I tend to make myself small. I was thinking, wow, you're doing this amazing thing. And that's not what I do. But he said, yeah, I think we should try teaching together. So we taught together for the first time, I think in 2017. And from day one, we just looked at each other and I said, I'm in. And he said, I'm in. It just felt really right. And I think, like you said, I think we complement each other in so many ways. And I think we're very good friends. And I think probably the biggest thing is that we're both completely committed to our own work on our own path of self-development using the Enneagram, and in sort of this very strong intention to use the Enneagram in ethical ways, in effective ways, in ways that are true to what it is, honoring the Enneagram as the sacred symbol that it is, and understanding how powerful it is and respecting it, and not wanting to make it ours or make our name out of it, but really be in service to the Enneagram and to people in using the Enneagram well, because there's so much potential of what we can do with the Enneagram when we're using it well, when we're humble about it, when we're doing our own work. And so as we started to work together, it just felt like a really great experience of what we both bring to the table, working together in a way that was effective.
Yeah, that's great. As a 5, I was just thinking about when he asked you, like, that took a lot for us to open our world up like that,
Yeah.
So that's beautiful.
Yeah.
So what are the benefits to attending and being a part of the CP Enneagram Academy?
Thank you. Yeah. So, well, the CP Enneagram Academy, we're basically we have 2 different focuses, or 2 big buckets of work. On the one hand, we have our professional certification program, and that is where we train professionals, like practitioners of any kind, and it's not always even practitioners. It's like people who are either coaches or therapists or spiritual directors or leaders in organizations, or just regular people who have the intention to work with the Enneagram with people. We call it the Enneagram for outer impact, as opposed to inner transformation. Inner transformation is the second bucket of work, which is helping people do the deep transformational work using the Enneagram with themselves, right? So either you kind of want to sort of integrate the Enneagram into your professional practice, and we get a lot of people also who are kind of wanting to transition into that kind of a role or that kind of a career, like people who've been doing something else. They've been working, in software, or they're a teacher or something else, and they decide, actually, I want to be some sort of coach or Enneagram teacher. And so they take our program partly as a way, we don't teach people to be coaches or anything, but we do teach people how to work with the Enneagram in a deep and effective way, in an ethical way, how to understand all the nuance and look past the myths and misconceptions and stereotypes that sometimes can dominate people's understanding of the Enneagram, so that if you're going to work with it, you're doing so in a really skillful way, and you're doing it in the way where you're understanding the Enneagram in the ways that will help you and not work against you. And then the other part is the inner transformation part, where it's people who just love the Enneagram and love working with it and want to use it for their own personal transformation. And so on the professional side, we have 2 professional workshops. One focuses a little bit much more on how to work with people of different centers, different types, different subtypes, all the, what do you do? What do you not do? What are the tips? What are the traps? All of these things that we think people need to know to work with the Enneagram well. And then we also have a workshop that focuses more on typing and assessment. And I think you attended the skills workshop, that first workshop in Virginia. And then the other one is what we call the solutions workshop. That's more about typing and assessment. So we teach people to do a typing interview in a good way, and also to assess what's going on with the client and how do I fit the Enneagram and this person's current challenges together in a way that helps them find the best solutions for what's going on with them. And then, of course, if you're in the full-on program, there's the 2 workshops, and you have to take one of our inner work retreats. And then there's integration work and coaching with one of our coaches in between, where people are kind of doing a lot of homework and stuff in between sessions to continue their learning and continue that process of getting really skilled up in the Enneagram. And then the inner work retreat part is we have 3 inner work retreats right now. We're also expanding that. And once you've been to 1 or 2 or 3 retreats, we offer advanced retreats. We're doing a shadows retreat in Iceland this December. But the 3 basic retreats, we used to call them retreats A, B, and C, but now we call them the experiential Enneagram, the psychological Enneagram, and the alchemical Enneagram.
Okay.
And those retreats are sort of like probably the heart and soul of the work we do. And it's when we work together with a group of at most 30 people, usually between 22 and 26 people. And for 5 or 6 days, we do really deep work with the Enneagram. So, and we use different methods, and it's always Oranio and I kind of working together. We use sort of somatic, energetic, emotional, intellectual, spiritual, intuitive approaches kind of all mixed together, depending on what we sense that somebody needs after learning a little bit about them, knowing their type and subtype, and sometimes instinctual sequence. And we just and also one of the things that's really amazing is how the group comes together, how it's both an experience of doing individual work, kind of moving the needle on how do I grow using the Enneagram from where I am on my path right now. And then, seeing other people do that work is unbelievably inspiring. And usually people come together and, they know each other super well after 5 or 6 days, and because they've all really been honored by witnessing each other's deep inner work. And takes a lot of courage, like you said before, it took courage for me to realize I was manipulative. It took courage for you to realize you might be spiritually bypassing,
Yes.
And I loved how you said that, because we know sometimes we're really making progress when it hurts, and it involves that kind of ouch, that pain of seeing something that our ego didn't want us to see.
Yeah.
So those retreats are really important. And then we have other events that we do that aren't part of those 2 programs, because we want, especially online, now that, COVID's changed the world, and it's easy now to train online and have communities of people meeting there. So we're doing a workshop on mastering the centers of intelligence right now. We do workshops on subtypes. We did one last year, and we're doing one again. We did one earlier this year. We're doing one again next year. We did a conflict and intimacy, love languages course, a 3-day course last week. So we try to do these other things too, both so people can have experiences without committing to a big program or even a 5 or 6 day deep retreat. Some people, that's not what they want. That's not what they're ready for. And we want to reach out and invite people into our community at different levels. And because there's no right way to do Enneagram work, it's really individual. I mean, we want to offer really high quality depth opportunities for work. But we also know that everyone is in a different place and wants something different, and that's okay. And we may not be for everybody. One last thing we have also is an online learning platform. We call it CP Online, and we do webinars once a month when people are in that community. It's a membership thing, and quarterly Q&As, and there's a lot of videos and things in that. It's kind of like a learning library that you get access to. And we're also trying to turn that more into a community where we've shifted our learning platform now, where we're going to have a forum on there. So we don't necessarily need to rely on a Facebook group. We've got a sort of a forum for people who are, committed enough to their Enneagram learning to sign up for this platform, where they have access to both these videos and materials, but also opportunities to interact with other people in the community in our webinars. And it's funny, just yesterday, we realized, we've been doing webinars in webinar format instead of meeting format. We need to switch to meeting format because it feels more like a community. Everybody's there, and it's not just us and then more of a separation. So yeah, that's kind of a picture of what we do.
Awesome. Is there a particular moment since you've been teaching that comes to mind when you just like, oh my God, I am just doing the right, what I'm saying? Like, this is what I was born to do. It's just the gratification of, opening yourself up and doing this work.
Yeah.
Asking that, does anything come to mind immediately?
I mean, I think that happened, that I feel or think that all the time. I feel so lucky to do this work, and I'm getting emotional. I feel so honored to be part of this work. It's so meaningful. It's like, there's such a sense of purpose in it. It's so amazing to see people and the courage they show in showing up for, different things, for their own path of self-development. And yeah, I mean, it's kind of a mystery sort of how I ended up here. It wasn't something like in high school is like, I want to be an Enneagram psychotherapist and teacher. I never would have dreamed this,
Yes.
but I mean, one of the things that's also meaningful to me is David Daniels was, my first Enneagram mentor, and he was sort of like a second father to me.
Yeah.
And he would say that I was like another child to him in public. And so it's a big honor to feel like I'm sort of carrying on his work. Sort of, I went into the family business and I'm carrying that on. And it's just, it couldn't be more meaningful. And so I think all the time how lucky I am, and how gratifying it is to be able to do this work. And I have to say, sometimes my personality, where I am on my path now as a 2, I can focus on the negative. I think it's a little bit of a 4 space I get in, but I also think it's defensive self-preservation too. And it really gets me down when I sort of can get into a negative mood or see what's not good, or, and focus a little too much on that. Cause I know by now, by observing myself, that's pure ego. And it's like, part of what's hard about that, I try not to be self-critical, because, we teach a lot. Like, once you start judging yourself, you're back down to the lowest level of awareness. So I'm trying not to be too self-critical. But when I'm not in touch with that feeling of sort of joy and amazement and gratitude for how fortunate I am to be able to do this work, and for so many people to be open to it, and to be able to make a contribution. I think the Enneagram, and not just me, but many people, yourself included, I think when we have a pure intention in our heart to use the Enneagram both for ourselves and for others in a way that helps people learn about it, I think we're having an impact on the evolution of humanity. I mean, again, I'm not saying this about me, that would be grandiose. It's us.
Yeah.
And so to be part of that, and social is my second instinct. To be part of that is part of what's so exciting, to be part of these groups and see people come together and be able to support someone meeting a challenge that's going to move the needle on their path of self-development, that's going to help them go forward in their journey. And then to see everybody supporting that, and it's just amazing. And I can't, and I'm, part of my meditation every day is gratitude. I'm so grateful to be able to be doing this.
Beautiful. And last but not least, because I really appreciate your time. I'm sure your schedule is, but I just want to ask, what words of guidance would you offer those who are aspiring to teach the Enneagram?
I would say, a couple things. One is, try to do a deep study of the Enneagram, not just maybe using one approach, but being open to different teachers, authors. Try to be choosy, and choose ones that are, that have stood the test of time, maybe, let's say. But do a deep study. Some people, I think, get one teacher or one book and they only stick with that. And sometimes I hear it in their language. It's like, well, they're using language it's not very inclusive when it comes to the different ways of approaching the Enneagram study. So that's one thing. Do a deep study. Don't take it lightly. Be humble about what you know, and keep open to learning. And also the second thing is, use the Enneagram for your own personal growth path, and really dedicate yourself to invest yourself in your own path using the Enneagram in whatever ways that might mean, and whatever things that you might bring into that path in addition to the Enneagram. different modes of healing or self-development work or therapy or things like that. Like Claudio Naranjo used to say, the Enneagram's not a standalone tool, but it's an excellent tool when brought into a toolkit, with other things, other modalities that you're using. So, and I think that when people are really doing sincere inner work, there's a kind of humility and a wisdom that people feel. So if you're seeking to be a practitioner, people will just get, the purity of your intention and the depth of your work. If your main goal is to commit to that and then follow the path where it leads.
Beautiful, beautiful. Dr. Chestnut, I thank you so much for sharing and opening yourself up to this conversation. I really appreciate it. And this can't be the last time you come on.
No. I love what you're doing with this podcast. I have to say, I love your questions. I love where they come from in you and your deep study of the Enneagram and your full engagement with this teaching and with your own path and just who you are. So thank you. I mean, I've been really impressed by your questions and I've loved this conversation. So thank you. Keep on doing it because you're doing great work.
Thank you so much. And those who want to learn more about your work and how to access your books and everything that you're offering.
Sure. Main thing is cpenneagram.com. You can go there and that leads to many places. We have an Enneagram test called the CPS Enneagram Compass that if you're new to the Enneagram and help trying to find your type, and you can see our live courses and all kinds of things there. And you can get our books on Amazon or at your local retailer. Awesome. Might be even better.
And your podcast.
And the podcast, yes, we have our own podcast. Uranio and I do a podcast we call Enneagram 2.0. And that's been really, really fun. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. This is Totem Confidence Podcast. Dr. Chestnut. Appreciate it. And stay tuned.